if I can like take a moment and go backwards and just explain really clearly for people that are listening, within a behavior, within human behavior, we have three contingencies. We have the antecedent, what happens before you do anything, then you have your behavior, your response, and then you have whatever contingency, reinforcement, or we say punishment, that maintains that behavior. So the antecedent,
that's a Skinner box, right?
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. So we're talking about, this is what Skinner called operant conditioning, which is different. And I will leave the fancy words behind in a second. But operant conditioning, we have an antecedent, what happens first, then our behavior of interest, what we're looking at, and then the consequence. Now we have Pavlov, and a lot of us are very familiar with Pavlov and Pavlov's dog. You ring the bell and the dog starts salivating. Pavlov, he looked at something, or initially that was respondent conditioning. That was just having that two things happening. You have a stimulus in the environment, that bell ringing, that has nothing to do with anything for this dog. But then they had the presentation of food, which made a dog salivate. And then when you presented those things together over many, many productions, you ring a bell and the dog started salivating. There was no consequence. So we learn very easily when we present a stimulus, something in the environment, with something else. So like the smell of a morning coffee, right? And if you, that's like, smell of morning coffee might get me out of bed to start doing something. So you might have that. And then like, say you're pretty lazy and you don't want your alarm, the alarm doesn't really do its job. So then like maybe you start pairing the alarm and your coffee machine goes off at the same time. So the alarm goes off and the coffee machine has a great smell. Then over many, many times that this is repeated, you just start getting off, you get up because the alarm has been paired with that coffee smell. You're not necessarily an alarm person. But that we leave behind. That's just typical conditioning. And I think a lot of people are familiar with that. Like I smell something and it reminds me of something, or I've had enough opportunities of these two things happening together that there's certain attributes that happen. What we look at in behavioral science is, again, what happens first, then the behavior, and then the consequence that maintains it. And what we can do here is we have an opportunity to change that consequence. And when we change that consequence, that's when we can change that behavior in question, right? So like if we're talking about, we can talk about increasing that behavior, which is when we say we reinforce it, or decreasing that behavior, which is when we call it punishment, which isn't the greatest word colloquially used because punishment carries a lot of baggage with it, but we use it in the scientific language. So always talking about how we increase or decrease behavioral responses. So when we talk about there's no good or bad behaviors, it's just what we do, it's all been based on how they've been reinforced, maybe socially or biologically in the past. So in cases of addiction, and we can talk about addiction to carbs because I think that's one, or sugar addiction.
And we should note that addiction to carbs is the same as addiction to anything else: alcohol, nicotine, prescription drugs, illegal drugs.
Yeah, it's because and what maintains it on that consequence then is that great like that feeling that we get. Or maybe it's there's something about it texturally, but there is a reinforcing consequence for engaging that. And then what you have to do is break and choose a consequence or that we're going to start driving down the behavior of eating those carbs.
Right. But let me interject there.
Yeah.
So, you have to help people understand that it is a psychological and a physiological addiction.
Absolutely.
And when you take away those carbs, that physiology is going to give a reinforcing consequence that you need your carbs.
Right. So what you have to do is what we look at in behavioral science is finding we call it a functionally equivalent response. Okay. So if you take away those carbs, right, that's eating those carbs is that behavior and choice. Your body is going to have a reaction and it's going to say, we want those carbs. I'm feeling sluggish. I don't know, maybe I'm cranky, or I miss the texture of eating those things, or I miss eating. I'm just gonna say I love peanut M&Ms, and sometimes I like just, they're paired also like with things that you're doing in your environment, like watching a movie and eating popcorn. They're together, but you have to find then a functionally equivalent response, and it might be choosing an alternative nutrition option that's going to either alleviate or decrease those feelings that you're missing those carbs. Or you find an alternative that it gets reinforced, right? And you are starting to create new habits and new formations. And that's where you can start introducing alternatives to the situation.